Hi, everybody. This is Al. Welcome back to the Kelly Writers House, actually or virtually. I want to make a few announcements at the beginning here, and then we're going to go right to your questions. We're going to talk about Stein's tender buttons, but I imagine there might be some general Stein questions. And I'm going to, in a few minutes, I'm going to introduce our guests today and a few people in the room. But before that, let me just make some announcements. First of all, we've gotten preliminary results from our survey of ModPo people. In the survey itself, which is not all of ModPo people, probably 25% of ModPo people filled out the forms, but in that group there are 159 countries represented in ModPo, so it's a small group, and presumably it would be 180 or something if we had everybody, including 3 people in Kazakhstan, 1 person in Syria, hello to you in Syria, Afghanistan, Iceland, Ivory Coast, Nepal, etc., etc. When we asked people why they're taking ModPo, 57% chose this one. I need to make time for poetry and arts generally in my life, 57%. 35% said I like to read poetry, but I find it difficult to do so on my own. I want to join others in doing so. Who are they? This is just a highlight, but who are they? 46% checked the following. Currently unaffiliated with a university or degree program, and are also not a poet or poetry critic. So not a professional poetry person and not affiliated with a university, 46%. 23% are teachers, if you lump together those who are teaching college, high school, middle school, and elementary school levels. So we have a lot of teachers, and we knew that anecdotally because Julia and I and the others received so many responses during the year from teachers who were able to use pieces of ModPo to introduce poetry that they were never able to teach or for some reason were too scared to teach. By 2 to 1, ModPo survey takers said that they had never read more than 1 poem by Gertrude Stein before starting this course, which means that a lot of people maybe had read 1 poem by Stein. I wonder what that would be. What do you think, Rachel? It's hard to imagine.
Really
one single tender button.
Because she doesn't mostly write poetry, and it's mostly not anthologized. So I don't know what poetry would mean. I mean, really not know.
It's hard to know. And maybe
does a rose is a rose count
as a poem? Well, you know what? Maybe that question in the survey meant if you're slightly familiar with Stein but otherwise haven't done any Stein, check it. And anyway, 2 to 1 said yes, they did. And I wanted a couple of shout-outs here in the room. Jeremy Dixon gets our award this year for traveling the furthest. He comes from Wales, from Cardiff, to be with us today. Turn it around on Jeremy. I'm sure at some point, Jeremy, wave. They can see you from a distance. At some point, we'll get Jeremy the mic, and we'll say hello to him. Jeremy, you're a regular in the forums. It's great to see you. Welcome, welcome. And also, Ray and Karen are here from the D.C. area, and everybody remembers Ray, who was a star last year. We brought him up to the table. I can't remember what the topic was. Maybe Claude McKay? Claude McKay. And Ray's back, so we're glad to see both of you. Karen is a Stein fanatic. She loves Stein. She's written about Stein. I was looking at her book this morning, so we're glad you're both here. Richard is here, and Ken has apparently come from Central Mexico. What part of Central Mexico? Well, Central, right.
Well, Mexico is
Katie, you have to be like Johnny on the spot with the portable mic. Sorry about that. Let's go to Ken. Yeah, hi, Ken. What did you say?
Oh, I said yes, I'm here from Central Mexico, representing all of the poets in Central Mexico, both of them.
Steve, do we have a sound on him?
Maybe the mic should
yes,
be turned
Katie,
on.
you have to turn the mic on. Okay, is it green? Try it now.
Well, Stein
Ken.
says there's no repetition, so go ahead
Katie,
and say that again.
All right. Well, Ken,
There is
anyway,
insistence.
we're so glad that you're here. Let me just give one other shout-out, and then we will proceed to introductions to our friends here and right to your questions. And the questions should be posted to the discussion forums. And Julia, to my left, is managing that. She's also watching the Twitter feed. And Lily, as always, hello, Lily, is on the phone. And if you want to call, make sure that you call this number, 215-573-9493. 9752. 215-573-NET 9752. Lily will answer the phone and convey your questions to our guest poets. And the third person to call today, will be sent. Lily will take your address offline, off the air, and we will send you a copy of this book, Letters to Kelly Clarkson, by Julia Block, our own Julia Block, who is a poet. There's some applause here from the other poets and others. Julia Block is a poet, has written a wonderful book of poetry, among other poems, and we'll send this to you if you're the third caller. I'm not sure what all that means, but it'll be fun. Okay, one more shout-out before we get going. So every day I receive something from someone from ModPo around the world, and here comes our first call. And I'm intrigued by it. I just want to tell you about one of them. Zach, can you focus on this? Actually, it's good enough. What we have is good enough. This is a book I received. There's a group of people on Shaw Island, which is off the coast of the state of Washington. Shaw Island has a total of 200 full-time residents in it. It's a very, very remote place. And of the 200 full-time residents, 50 people, that's a big portion of the town, 50 people came out for a ModPo-hosted poetry reading on the island, on Shaw Island, wherever the heck it is. And I apologize to the Shaw Islanders who are watching for not knowing where it is. I should have done my Google Maps.
It has to be in the western part of Washington.
Yes, it would have to be, Bob. That's exactly right. And they put together this book that consists of the poems that were read that day. I'm really moved by this because it means that ModPo is it's spreading. Right, to use a Steinian word.
I was going to say.
And the most remarkable thing is that the ModPo people were able to, the few ModPo people who are there in Shaw Island, were able to convene 30% of the townspeople to do poetry on behalf of ModPo. And what Elaine Griffin, who is one of the poets on Shaw Island, who used to live in Alaska and was the Teacher of the Year for the state of Alaska a few years ago. It's a great teacher who seems to have, I guess, moved to Shaw Island or retired there, wrote a comment in which she partly said, explained the ModPo thing, and then wrote, through our group discussions, we fell under the spell of words like those Kendra, who was one of the other poets who read that night, read you, and these are the words that Kendra, who's a non-ModPo person, who was at that reading on Shaw Island that night, and she wrote in her poem, I put my eye to the grid, it is dark, dark. And she, Elaine, then commented, she helped us learn how to listen to the, quote, unintelligible syllables. And there's a lot about Gertrude Stein in this book, and so Shaw Island, Steinians, grooving to unintelligible syllables. I love the outreach. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. And please keep sending me these things. I'll tell you more about them later. Okay, so our guests. This is a very special webcast because we have, of course, a poet who's also our fabulous lead TA, Julia Block, who's here to my left. And we have to my right and your left, we have Bob Perlman, who's and there's so much I could say about Bob. He's a colleague. His selected poems are called 10 to 1. This morning I went to Amazon to check to make sure there's a lot of supplies, and there are. So 10 to 1 selected poems, Bob Perlman. And one of his critical books is called The Trouble with Genius, which includes a chapter on Gertrude Stein. So I'll just say that about Bob. Bob, welcome. So glad you could do this.
My pleasure.
And Ron Silliman has joined us in Toronto, Ontario. Can we flash Ron? Hello, Ron.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little dark. You should turn some lights on in that room that you're in if you can. But otherwise,
I can, but I might then proceed to shine brighter than one might imagine.
Okay. Well, actually, you look great. You look a little ghostly, but great. And so Ron Silliman, Silliman's blog, which you just need to put into a Google, any of your favorite search engine, Silliman's blog, and you'll get this amazing blog that all of us watch and look at, and it has many millions of people who've clicked on it over the years. Tonight he is reading in Toronto, and I know there's Ingrid Phillip and a whole bunch of other ModPo people who are watching now who could get in their cars or public transport, which is good in Toronto, 8 p.m. Toronto time at PWYC 850 Dundas Street West. Dundas Street West, tonight at 8 p.m. I hope you'll go and see Ron, and then you'll come up to him and say you're a ModPo person. And among Ron's books is a magisterial, big, important book called The Alphabet. It consists of 26 books that each one for each letter of the alphabet that had been written over the course of a quarter of a century. And speaking of a quarter of a century of work, to my right immediately is the beloved, great poet Rachel Blau Duplessis, who's recently completed her long poem called Drafts. The most recent installment of Drafts is called Drafts 96 to 114, and it's called Surge. The short title is called Surge. I hadn't written that down, so I had to remember it. And one of her critical books is called Purple Passages 2012, and I just checked this morning. There are paperbacks and also Kindle editions available. ModPo people are really into the online versions. So all four of these poets have ample author pages on Pensound where you can listen to their recordings. So thank you, Rachel. I didn't get to say thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So we're going to have about an hour from this point to answer your questions and respond, to talk to people in the room. So let's get started. Lily, who do we have on the phone?
We have Sophia calling from the Bay Area with a question about Stein, and it's also her birthday.
Okay,
Oh,
so
happy
let's
birthday.
bring her up. Sophia?
Yes,
Hi, can you hear me?
yes, I can.
This is Al.
Oh, wow. That's wild because you're speaking into the mic but you're here on the phone.
Yes, it's remarkable. What I suggest you do now is to turn your computer off and listen to us just through the telephone because you won't get confused.
Okay, okay.
Okay, happy birthday. We're going to sing happy birthday really quick to you. You want a happy birthday song? Actually, you have no choice. All right, everybody in the room, Katie, bring that mic around on the 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Louder! Happy birthday, dear Sophia in San Francisco. Happy birthday to you. I heard a harmony.
Wow,
Happy birthday, Sophia.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for the
So, what is your question about Stein? Tell us.
Well, it's actually more of an epiphany. I had this epiphany. You know, like many other people, I have been reading Stein, and even though I've had some exposure to modern poetry and I write, but, you know, it was, I joked to my friend that I need to do Stein in homeopathic doses because it's intense. So I suddenly, you sent all the students the note saying about the live webcast, and the end of the note you signed off with a quote from Stein, which was loving repeating.
Loving repeating, yes.
And it suddenly clicked. I had an epiphany. I realized that I was thinking about Stein in the wrong way, in a linear way, going from point A to point B. That's not how her writing works. I had this vision of Pina Bausch, the experimental dancer, and I realized the repetition in Pina Bausch, the way that moves through space, I needed to think of Stein in terms of spatial relationships, not linear relationships.
Okay, good.
And as soon as I thought of that, everything clicked into place. I understand how her writing is nonlinear, I understood everything all of a sudden.
That's great.
So that's my epiphany.
That's great. Sophia, how about if we do this? Why don't you go off the phone and turn your computer back on and listen to our responses? And I'm going to invite
I will.
Ron, Bob, and Rachel briefly in that order just to comment on anything Sophia said, either to talk about loving repeating or this idea of spatial writing. Ron, would you start on that?
Sure. I actually tend to agree with Sophia. Happy birthday, Sophia. Stein's work often proceeds in my head rhythmically, and that seems to be very close to, I think, what Sophia is saying. I often, after reading a little bit, particularly of Tender Buttons, find myself sort of habitually putting all of my observations into various Steinian rhythms that one could easily see as leading into dance lines, much the way that the poem before us, A Long Dress, could easily have been a challenge for an episode of Project Runway. and which in fact actually at some point I'm going to suggest to the people at Project Runway, because it would make a great episode. In those terms, you can take her work and move it in plastically in many different directions. Every once in a while I hear the notebooks of William James in her work. That's, I think, the closest she gets to a logical process as such. But there is a subterranean motive always at work. And her writing is actually quite remarkably clear, given the fact that it seems very abstract.
Thank you, Ron. That's terrific. Bob, do you want to take a shot at any of those topics?
Well, I'm just wondering about the notion of space, and there can be a sense of space that is contained and knowable at once, like a map, you know, in the national parks. You are here,
Yeah.
where you see the whole thing and you know where you are. And I think with Stein, that's not a helpful idea. I'm not saying that Sophia is thinking that way, but it's easy to sort of to take the word space and to take it over that way. I think with Stein, the sense of you are here is central. That the continual present is what's really important, and it doesn't. Things don't add up narratively, and so your focus stays on the present of a sentence. And a sentence can change syntax mid-sentence, or one sentence can say something quite different than the prior sentence, etc. So it's really, in a funny way, presentist, which is kind of anti-space in
Right.
that other map sense.
Interesting. So I'm going to turn to Rachel, but first I'm just going to remind you that the phone number is 215-573-9752. And of course, everybody wants to be the third caller so they get a copy of Julia's book. And after Rachel's comment, Julia, we'll turn to you to see if there's some questions in the forum. Rachel, please.
Yeah, let's see. It was about repetition.
Yes.
The issue for me is that Stein resists many of the ways that we consume writing normally, and it is so anti-normative that one almost thinks that it's anti-everything, but it's partially the things that you want, and it's partially not the things you want, by which I mean it seems to be not non-mimetic, but not mimetic either. So it's sort of semi-mimetic. You get words that you recognize, like malachite or milk or something, but
I didn't recognize malachite. I had to look it up.
Words you can.
Oh, well, you know, what can I say?
Some of us.
Some of us had to, you know, some of us who took geography and were deeply affected by it. So it is not entirely narrative, but it's sort of semi-narrative because there are narrative bits that go along, but it's also not narrative. And the thing that is quite amazing in terms of repetition or repeating, it doesn't repeat. There's no memory. And one of the things that is strangest about Stein is that you can read it and then you can reread it, and it's as if you never did read it. You can memorize it eventually.
Wow.
That is,
The short ones.
That is, you can, you know, some of us know it well and well enough to retain certain moments of Stein, but the erasure of memory and the erasure of history in one's reading process is extremely radical. So it really pushes against many of the laws or the internalized mechanisms that one has for consuming writing.
Wow.
I think I'll just...
That's a great, thank you. Thank you all. Julia, a comment from the forums?
I have a question that I think relates to what Rachel was just saying. This is from, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, I'm going to say Chia. So this is a question about reading Stein, and this ModPo student writes, to a student of poetry, the poetry seems to defy close reading. It's very, very difficult to read the poems normatively in the way that you just described, and this student's suggesting it. It also defies maybe some of the other even kinds of close reading that we learn in the classroom. So the question here is that complexity purposely set up as a reaction to Victorian era poetry? Is it what we know as the thing that makes the poems modernist or the pieces modernist? Sort of what is that complexity about?
So, Chia, I think you've asked two questions, and I think I'm going to exercise my control as moderator to ask us to look at the first part of that, which is an implied question, is the tactics, the strategies of close reading that we've been doing in this course, and we'll do a lot in this course, do they work well for Stein? Is that the appropriate method? And I think I'm going to ask, again, all three of you, but promise to be brief. I'd love to hear your views on this, starting with Ron again. Close reading work for Tender Buttons?
Well, I think it works in the sense that it will provide you with a lot of word-by-word, phrase-by-phrase information. If you're looking for a specific kind of narrative or figurative setting to then come out of that, however, I think you're going to be quite frustrated.
Okay.
I think you sort of get going and you keep moving, but it doesn't ever particularly lead to a tableau.
Good, thank you. Bob, what do you think about this?
I think that you have to read Stein in a way more closely than close reading. Each word is quite an event. Each word is an event in Stein. The twist is that for close reading, there is the sense of looking at something, putting it in perfect focus, and you come out with a very clear photograph of one thing. In Stein's case, the close reading gives you multiple semantics, multiple scenarios.
Great, thank you, Bob. Rachel?
The thing about close reading that we're a little bit forgetting when we talk about it now is that close reading is also associated with new criticism, which is an extractive reading strategy that goes to themes and to folding things in to a kind of poise that is often paradoxical. Stein is very difficult to do this with. Mm-hmm. So you can exercise the tactic of close reading, meaning you can do the wonderful job that some of the Penn students did on the tapes that you might have seen, of doing the dictionary thing very, very well and finding this kind of splay of words, but you can't resolve the narrative or the thematics or so on. In many ways, Stein has subtexts, but she has no texts. And that becomes a very strange reading effect. So what you can say that something hits the surfaces of the words and then generates material out of those dictionary definitions of the surface, but that the cubist strategy, which some people have talked about, notably Marjorie Perloff and others, where you see different sides of an object, is not really actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because what's happening to me is that when you get a word or a phrase, because Stein often works by small phrases, a spoon is, or a sudden, right, spoon something, and you segment the phrases. Yeah. But what happens is, instead of going in, like here's a surface of the object, and here's the bottom of the object, and here's the side, and so on, right, the cubist thing, right, you go out. And some of the going out from these words are actually cul-de-sac. That is, you can't go any further. You just get out to this, and then nothing happens. Right. And some of them go very, very far. So they're irregular in their shape, whereas a cubist thing is not irregular in its shape. It's, you get the carafe or whatever, the blind glass, whatever, yeah, that you're looking at.
Al, yeah, let me.
Yeah, brief though, Bob.
Brief. Mm-hmm. I think a really key moment with Stein is say in composition as explanation, the opening, right, sentence. The only thing that makes a difference, and then she goes on to say, but the way she uses a difference differently, that right, that any word in Stein it's really a frame, and it's a frame that can be accessed multiply. So, yeah, one of your students was worrying that words don't have meaning in Stein. I think that's not true. I think they're extremely meaningful, each one, but they mean lots of different things, and they can mean their opposite, and there can be a difference that doesn't make any difference. Yeah. Yeah. And there can be a difference that makes a difference.
So well put. I'm already feeling like this was such a great idea to invite you to comment on this, because this, we have thousands of people in ModPo who are grappling with Gertrude Stein, some of them for the first time, and they ask the kinds of questions to which your comments have been answers. So this is great. I want to go to a call with Lily, and then what I want to do, Katie, is sort of ask a bunch of people to say something very briefly to which our poets will respond, people in the room. So get ready, Jeremy Dixon and others. Lily, who do we have on the phone? Zach, can you...
This is Maria calling from Greece with a question about Stein.
Okay, let's bring Maria up. Hello, Maria. This is Al.
Hey!
Hey!
Can I say something a bit poetic? Thrilled is my chair I sit on as I talk to you.
It's great that you called. Are you in Athens?
Oh no, I'm in Crete. You know
You're in
Crete?
Crete. I know where Crete
Yeah.
is.
It's a great
Do I have an
island for those who
invitation
don't
to visit?
know.
Do I have an invitation to visit Crete? Not to presume too
All
much.
of you,
All of you,
and
35,000
Poplar and the
people.
whole team. I mean, I love you all, guys. You're great.
Oh,
You're all
that's
great.
That is
Thank
so
you
nice.
very much for this.
Oh, you are
It's
welcome. So, do you have a question or a comment about Gertrude Stein?
Yes. After I just like to ask something. After reading Williams and then reading Gertrude Stein, I would like to ask something about these poets that do something that's avant-garde. I mean, she wrote a poem 1914, The Tender Buttons. I mean, it's great. They try to reintroduce the world to us in a new form, in a new poetic line. So are they actually, by reintroducing the world, are they reinventing the world? Are they regaining the world?
Okay.
I mean, that's a general question.
That's a good question. Are you Anne-Marie or Maria?
Maria.
Maria. Okay.
Yes.
Maria, I'm going to sort of restate what I think your question was, or at least say the topic, and then invite Ron, Bob, and Rachel each briefly to comment in any way they like about that.
Okay, great.
What was Stein's purpose in those early years? She was doing something so different. Was she remaking the word? Was she reconceiving how words get used?
Or was it world that she was remaking? I thought she said
Let's
world.
throw world in there too.
That's what I heard.
Maria, would you?
Yeah, it's like the Wittgenstein thing. My words, my world. You know,
Oh, world.
something
Okay, got
like
it.
that. Okay.
Got it. So was this revolutionary, not just linguistically, but socially, politically, geographically,
Yes.
etc.? Very good.
Yes.
Maria, thank you for the call.
Thank you.
And
I love you all.
love
I
you
wait
too.
you
This
all
is
in
great.
Crete.
All right,
Thank
take
you very
care.
much.
All right, so
Bye,
we're going
bye.
to take Maria's. We're going to answer her question off the air. I'm going to turn to Ron. You want to address this briefly in any way you like?
Sure. Thinking that this book is coming up on its centennial, one of the things that occurs to me is that the concept even of what a word was linguistically was very, very different at the time that Stein was writing this. She's really coming out of 19th century philosophy and philology, and she is extending some ideas from that world, particularly from William James, and also doing some very new and different things that had not been done before, except possibly in painting, in which objects had been used in different ways.
Thank you, Ron. Bob, your thoughts on this?
I have the same thoughts as Ron. No, I think the analogy with painting was crucial, and she talks about Cezanne and the way he put small patches of color, each patch being of equal importance, no foreground, no background. I think that was a great instigation for new ways of using words for her.
That's great. Thanks, Bob. Rachel, your thought?
I don't have a thought. I think I'm going to pass on this
Okay,
one.
great. So we're going to find out who the caller is, and then I'm going to ask if this caller is local, not paying roaming fees. I'm going to ask him or her to hold on the line, because, Katie, I want to get that mic around to everybody here. So, Lily, who do we have on the phone?
Actually, Al, I'm in the middle of getting his info. He's
Okay,
our winning caller.
and then when you get the info, ask him to hold on, because
Okay.
we're going to... Okay, so Katie, what I want you to do is give the mic to Ken, right? And what I'm going to do is invite a bunch of you, give the mic to Ken, please. I'm going to invite a bunch of you to say in a sentence or two what you are encountering this week as you're reading Gertrude Stein and ModPo. Just throw it out there, a topic, an issue, a problem. Very briefly, I want to collect these and have our guests respond. So Ken, do you want to go first?
Well, I come to this new life in writing from a life in architecture. And I struggle a little bit with Stein, but the comment made earlier by a caller about reading Stein spatially really knocked me out. The ways that space was mentioned, the dancing analogy and the map and all of that, I see it differently because when I think architecture, I see space and objects in space. And thinking now in a new way about Stein from that perspective.
That's nice.
Fabulous.
Thank you. That's great, Ken. Bring it all the way over to Jeremy at the end of that row. Jeremy, briefly. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello.
So glad that you joined us.
Thank you.
I hope you have a lot to do in the United States other than come to a ModPo live webcast, which you could get at home in Cardiff.
I've got a packed itinerary.
Okay, great. Great.
I was just going to say, do you think for all the people studying ModPo, as where English isn't their first language, they're actually at an advantage with Stein?
Okay,
because
great.
some of the, the structures that we have, they might not be there, and I just wonder if they should take that as a positive away.
That's great. We are going to definitely address that one. Do you want to bring the mic forward? This is Richard, I believe. Hello, Richard. This is your first time to the Writers' House, I think.
It is. Thank you, Al.
And you've been involved with ModPo?
Yes.
And how's it going so far?
Beautiful.
Great. Do you want to say something, throw an issue out that the group will respond to?
For me, the difficult and amazing thing about Stein's work comes from listening to it online, listening to her read it. And there is the largest difference between the enjoyment that I get from her reading it compared to to my own reading of it. And I can't understand why it's so understandable when I hear her, and so much less understandable when I try to do it myself.
These are such great issues. How are we going to handle them all? Let's do two more. So we'll go to Ray and then Karen. Ray, hi.
Hi, ModPo World. I had a question.
There's a lot of Ray Maxwell fans out there.
Oh boy.
Ray, seriously, you're a star.
Just a question for the members of the panel, and maybe we can discuss it later. These leaders of poetic movements have had sort of descendants and have found themselves manifested in popular culture, I think, in various ways. And I'm wondering how has Gertrude Stein's work worked its way through highbrow culture to everyday culture?
Love it. All right, that's another one. I love that question, and we'll go to Karen for the last of these.
Just want to say that Gertrude Stein was the people's modernist. So
the people's modernist.
The people's modernist. So we need to keep that in mind because she spoke with very simple words, and she meant for the man on the street, the woman on the street, to hear her. What I'm struggling with is kind of strange because I'm thinking, what would Stein's world have been like, her artistic world, had there been no Picasso, had there been no Braque?
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to summarize these and invite Ron and Bob and Rachel to say anything they like about any of these issues, and we can probably take them, a couple of rounds. And then, Lily, we'll go to the phone. Is that person calling from the U.S. or Canada?
From the U.S.
Okay,
yeah.
So no roaming charges. Okay, so keep that person holding on. So Ken talked about reading spatially, to put it briefly, and felt it was a revelation for him. Jeremy talked about how it might be an advantage to be a second language reader, speaker in ModPo, to be encountering Stein. Richard talked about the difference in listening to Stein. Ray asked about pop culture influences to this day. And Karen, after asserting that Stein is the people's modernist, wondered what her world would be like without Picasso, would have been like without Picasso or Braque. Ron, you want to take one or two of those and be as brief as you can?
The one that really hit home for me was Ray's, because I think it's a fabulous question. Stein was the people's modernist in that she was popular and relatively accessible partly because of the size of many of her better-known works. I mean, we're not talking Making of Americans today. We're talking sort of the other end of her work. But when she died, I mean, after World War II, when she did Willie and Brewster, or Brewster and Willie, I guess it is, she was very much like the kind of modernist avant-garde poet you could see in Life magazine or in Time. And she was treated quite sort of comically, as a bit of a joke, and since that helped sell copies of some of her books, I think she was more than a little willing to let that go forward. But it meant that in the 1950s, after she died in, I believe, June or July of 1946, and in the 1950s, you could not find a serious reader of Gertrude Stein outside of Robert Duncan anywhere in the English-speaking world. And it was only in the later 60s and 70s that her work began to come back into reading and into prominence, and it feels very good at this moment in the 21st century to realize that you can't read the 20th century without including Stein. It's a complete transformation when you think of the elitism that surrounded the modernism, say, of Ezra Pound, who was the other big modernist who was in the news a lot at the end of World War II because of his treason trial, and the kind of cloistered elitism that surrounded T.S. Eliot up until his death. We have seen great transformations in the reputations of all of these people. Not one of them is the writer they were the day they died.
Great, thank you, Ron. Bob, your thoughts on any of those questions?
Well, too many to be brief about, so I'll just pick a couple. The language question, I don't know. I mean, I'm mostly monolingual to my shame. I would think that not knowing English well would make reading Stein quite hard. It's hard enough when you know English to read, to the energy, athleticism that's required. It really taxes one's, in a nice way, taxes one's reading mind. No Picasso, no Braque, no Stein. She would have continued on the track of kind of a slightly turgid William James scientist, a novelist like Making of Americans. I hope I'm not treading on toes when I say that. The burst of freedom, syntactic, semantic freedom she got from painting. It was transformative. I mean, she wrote nothing like Tender Buttons before, and in fact, she didn't write too much like Tender Buttons afterwards either. But that's a whole other set of questions.
Thank you, Bob. That was great. Rachel?
Yeah, I think a couple of things, as Gertrude Stein might have said. I think I could answer that other question now that I said I wasn't going to answer, which is to say something about the experimental processes of Zola and 19th century novel, because the questions that we're avoiding here are historical questions, which is kind of comic, and it is hard to be historical about Stein, to place her in an hour, right? Zola in the experimental novel said something like, you have to keep things like a scientific experiment, which you have to keep much steady state, neutral, and then do one thing.
Right.
And Stein did that. In other words, that's one of her processes. That's what she tended to do. Okay. The language question is interesting. Stein's syntax in Tender Buttons is generally fairly straightforward. This is a strange thing to say. If you look at her verbs, there are not that many of them. They're mostly is or makes. The sentence structure is generally not hypotactic, that is not subordinated. I'm not trying to overgeneralize too much here. So it looks as if you're reading definitions of things. This is this, that is that. And for a non-English speaking person, the syntax might be sort of held steady state, whereas the words are fairly simple. There are very few very complex words. So it might feel as if you're getting it, but I would say that nobody's really getting it, not even right now, not even here and now. And one of the, in response to the question about being read to, rather than, I guess it's Richard,
listening,
sort of listening to something rather than reading it yourself. It's a fantastic question in a way for me, because it does again point to one's conventions of reading. You put your eye on the page, you expect certain things. For example, you expect literariness from a literary page, and what you're getting is linguisticness. So that's the other thing you're getting when somebody's reading to you. And do we have that many recordings of Stein where you...
We don't have that many.
So you may be hearing other people reading Stein in a very Steinian way.
Well, I think Richard probably was thinking of if I told him, would he like it? You know, the
okay, that's the one. So what you're getting is a kind of, the word that we haven't said yet about Stein, the erotic sense of a kind of intimacy with the word patterns and rhythms and so on. So she's removing a lot of what we expect when we read, and she's giving you pleasure. That is, the word flow one-to-one, the simple, bright colors of it, saying it that way, are very pleasurable, and there's a very strong erotic charge in Stein that that probably we need to talk about. Although,
let me just, I want to jump in there too. I was thinking about that question, and I think it's one answer is what she chose to read, or what few things we have that she read, and they tend to be the more phrase-based, where she plays changes on the length of phrases. If I told him, if Napoleon, that kind of thing, which is not like Tender Buttons, which is Tender Buttons is harder.
Yeah.
To I don't think a reading of that would be as easy as the other one. But I just wanted to add to Rachel's what you said about Stein's eroticism. Absolutely right. But it is not just an easy, pleasurable eroticism. It's a very intellectual eroticism of having a phrase of, you know, a length of 4, a length of 5, or a length of 3, not mathematically, but comparatively, and playing around by never doing exactly the same thing. Sort of keeping the erotic partner, the reader, in a teasing suspense.
Yeah, great. Thank you all. And Julie, do you want to add anything to a response to any of those issues?
Yeah, I want to say one little thing about Richard's comment about listening, and that has to do with music, because there were a couple of questions on the discussion forums also about Stein's relationship to music, and is it as important as her relationship to painters? And I think there's something to be said there for experiencing the work out loud. I agree that the portrait is quite different from the Tender Buttons, and I think reading the Tender Buttons aloud does something different than when you listen to the portrait, because of the portrait's emphasis on repetition. And I'm just going to repeat everything you guys just said, but there's a certain musicality there also, which is very important, and again brings us back to Rachel's point that there's a challenge to traditional concepts of literariness in this work. We don't normally expect a piece of literature to be literally musical in that way, to be making sounds.
We also have, of course, and maybe Richard is thinking of this too, we have this week in ModPo, we have a recording of Jackson McClough reading a carafe that is a blind glass, and then we have Jackson doing a semi-spontaneous talking close reading of the sounds of that poem. So if you haven't done that, I recommend it. I highly recommend it. We're going to be encountering Jackson McClough in chapter 9.2 at the end of the course. Lily, did you lose the person on the phone?
Yeah, I think that he got disconnected, but he was our big winner.
He just wanted the book.
But yeah, but you have the address. Okay.
I do.
All right. So the line is free, and you can call. So 215-573-9752. Julia, can you bring something up from either the forums or the Twitter feed?
Yeah, I have a question posted by Mark Snyder, one of our fabulous community TAs, and he's posting it on behalf of people in our Hopelessly Lost thread. So there's a very long and active thread in the discussion forums called Hopelessly Lost, which I think was started by some of the community TAs.
And that's Hopelessly Lost because of, Stein is the...
It
preceded Stein.
Yeah.
This is Hopelessly Lost week 4 is the one where she's talking about now. Go ahead, Julia.
So this is a very simple question, but it's also a very complex question. Would you say a few words about what it means to understand a poem?
Woo! Hey, Ron Sullivan, how do we say something about... I'm actually not teasing about the question. It's from Mark Snyder. But I'm teasing about Ron's being called upon to answer it. Good luck, Ron.
Right. I have been working very hard for 50 years trying to come to any kind of simple answer to that question, and the only thing I can say is I think that in the best writing, which includes that of the people sitting at the table next to you, Al, as well as Gertrude Stein, you actually have to answer it differently for every work. One of the things about poetry, a good definition of poetry actually, would be it is that writing that actually brings its own definition of reading along with it.
Wow, that's a great answer. Bob, can I vary the question for you, which is what does it mean to understand Stein?
Good
luck.
Okay. If the language feels, if the passage you're reading feels open and you see some things there, and I totally agree with Ron that they're not going to be the same things each time, and if they are, then it gets a little bit sad and dead, and it's like you're recognizing an intersection you've been to before, and oh yes, that's what that is. But an image would be of a door being open to a more complex situation that arises from the specifics of the poem. So let me just, slight digression, quick one. Williams says that a poem is a machine made of words, which is a sort of a great soundbite, and just totally deeply wrong as only Williams can be. I love Williams. But just think of a machine that does different things each time, perhaps like a brain maybe, that isn't just simply rotating wheels or whatever a machine does. And a poem is a difference-making machine when it's a good poem. And Stein is certainly an active difference-making machine. Put it that way.
Okay, great. Rachel, quickly on this.
Oh, brother.
This is not easy.
Okay, first of all, when you talk about poetry, you're talking about whole bunches of things. One would be piles and piles of conventions and traditions which pile up historically, so that one knows the past variously. Okay, granted that Stein is attempting to erase that, she can't totally erase the meanings of words. So poetry does something with polysemy and with the sensuousness of language that draws polysemy.
No, the next word.
The sensuousness.
Sensuous. Okay.
The sensuousness of language. I thought you had heard of that. Bob.
No, I just didn't hear the word you said. That's sorry.
Tease Bob
okay,
about
I'm usually
this.
the deaf one here.
Yeah.
That enriches the work of the brain, which Bob. My friend Bob Perlman was referring to, and that sensuousness and polysemy, the suggestiveness of language, is organized variously according to, let's say, different rules or the breaking of those rules through the history of poetry. So the more you know, as I used to say to my students.
Wow, I love ending with that. Lily, we have someone on the phone.
Yeah, it's Moshe calling from Israel. I think he wants to weigh in on reading Stein as a non-native English speaker.
Great. All right, bring Moshe up. Hello, Moshe. It's Al. Hello, Moshe. Can you hear me? Did we lose him, Steve?
Oh, dear.
Okay, that's too bad. All right,
Call
well,
back.
he'll call back. Moshe always finds a way back. Katie, would you give Andrea the mic? Sorry, Andrea, you're on the spot again. Oh, you got to turn that on.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Al.
So you're going through Stein for the second time. Had you done any Stein before last year's course?
I think I was familiar with The Roses, Roses, Rose. I think that was
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay, so very briefly, tell us about Stein in the fall of 2012 and now what it feels like to be doing Stein in the fall of 2013. Can you make any distinctions? And we'll ask maybe one of our poets to respond to this comment.
Yes.
Stein was where everything turned around for me in ModPo
Really?
first time. It really was. I was sort of just, kind of going along like it was a regular MOOC, and then we got to Stein and my world exploded.
Oh,
and it
Andrew.
was just, language as something other than information giving, language as something other than a way to describe something, describe an object in its physical form, but to describe the experience of the object.
Yeah.
All of that stuff was just so mind changing and mind warping, and I still have, history teaches that history teaches things like that still repeat in my head on a regular basis, and that doesn't happen with other poets. So she became this earworm for me last year.
Yeah.
This year, I can get a little bit deeper and kind of, I've been focusing a lot on the idea of deconstructing the noun, I guess, the idea that she has of there is no point once you've named something in doing anything else with that name. Nouns are no longer...
Except if you want to take a role, she
yes,
says.
if you want role, exactly. And I love that idea, and I think that's such a powerful thing for poetry. So
all right, I'm going to just randomly choose Bob to respond to Andrew's experience. You've taught Stein for many years. Is this gratifying?
It's great. It's very gratifying. I mean, that's what you want. That's why to teach Stein, because she's so fascinating and pleasurable and smart.
It just plain old makes me happy, Andrea, that we've become friends. We know each other, and you did Stein through a MOOC, an online course, with that tens of thousands of people participating. I mean, if Stein can be done that way, then a lot of other stuff can be done that way. Ron, you're a big fan of ModPo. You were very excited about what we did last year. Do you want to comment on this whole teaching thing, or Andrew's experience, or anything like that?
I think Andrea's quite right, and I think part of it, and this goes not just to Stein but to all poetry, is that it's inescapable reading Gertrude Stein that the supposed information-giving element of language is not the only thing going on. That denotation is simply connotation special case. And in Stein, Stein doesn't get old precisely because Stein never simply lapses into denotation.
That's great. Rachel, I can't resist asking you to come. You've also taught Stein for many years.
I mean, I'm fascinated by the fact that she breaks the contract of legal tender. She butts into the tender. And that is, for me, when you get down to the way that language is used communicatively, that the way that she systematically subverts it is absolutely fascinating. It's also quite frustrating. I mean, I'd like to interrupt the love feast for a second just to acknowledge love
or feast. Yes, like
I thought of it as kind of like a Holy Communion or whatever. I'd like to interrupt the love feast and just point to things that we haven't said, which would be what is missing in Stein. I mean, I'm sorry, what is missing in Tender Buttons, because Stein varies considerably. And one thing that is actually fascinating that's missing in Tender Buttons is the pronoun I, which, if you look carefully, if I've done my homework correctly, there's probably just one or two, one of which is, I hope she has her cow, which could be commented on for quite a long time.
Well, we should comment. I think people need to know.
Yeah, wait. I mean, just
hidden meanings.
Speaking of hidden, well, that's what I meant by there's a sort of, I mean, there's subtext. One of the subtexts is an erotic subtext without having a text. And Stein and Alice Toklas were kind of getting together around this. This is like a wedding or a wetting, which has a trousseau, and it has a number of allusions to couples and sexuality, quite a number actually, but it's not the only meaning. And it's interesting, it's sort of like once you say that, you've said a mouthful. It's kind of like when you teach Plath and people say, but didn't she commit suicide? And then everything gets read in terms of the suicide. Okay, I don't want everything in Stein to get read in terms of lesbianism or lesbian connections, but it is a very, very important subtext. Okay, to return to what's missing from Stein, in Tender Buttons, generally speaking, moral judgment is missing. Not totally, but there are very few words that tell you that things are that how to think about morality. There are also very few nasty words. There's one, pus. But what I mean is it's mostly like nice, if you know what I mean. It's in the realm of the nice. There are very few complicated verbs, and so on. So there's a lot of predication, but there are no affirmations, except there's a plethora of affirmations, so they kind of they disappear. So it fascinates me that one has a strong reaction. Again, I'm going back to Richard's question, to something that doesn't affirm the ego I, but is affirming an eye seeing and an ear hearing throughout the whole process. Because much poetry that we know and like and respect is very I-based, meaning it's about me, me, me. But Stein seems to be telling you that it's about it, and the it thing is the language. Which sorry.
Now maybe this is too complicated for our 10 minutes of MOOC left, but suddenly when, I was saying, yes, that's right, and then at the end of what you were saying, I was thinking, no, that's not right at all. Because I suddenly thought, wait, are you saying there's no I in Stein? You're saying there's no ego in Stein? You're saying that Stein wasn't one of the most Stein-affirming
no, I'm not saying that.
biological beings
I'm
ever?
saying there's no
I.
The pronoun I in tender buttons. I'm not saying that.
Let me just stipulate that Andrea has to come back for ModPo 2014 in order to deal with all those things that are missing in Stein, and we'll leave that question open. Lily, who do we have on the phone?
We have Janina calling from the Philippines.
Janina.
I think she wants to weigh in on readers who are non-native speakers and reading practices for Stein in general.
Great. Okay, bring up Janina. Hello, Janina. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Al.
Is it Nina, N-I-N-A? Janina.
I know, it's Janina, yeah. J-A-N-I-N. Yes.
What time is it there? Is it midnight?
Yeah, that's right. It's about 1 in the morning.
Oh, my goodness. You're great for staying with us. Do you have a comment or question about Stein?
Right, yeah. I think it was discussed earlier about the readers who are not speakers of who do not have English as their first language. And I think for me, because reading Stein is actually quite a bit of a struggle for me. It's very difficult to read her and to actually understand what she means. But I think in a way, it's a little bit of an advantage for someone like me, because I tend to reread and reread her. And my question is that, could it be that she actually wrote the things that she wrote in order for us to read her work different every time every time that we read them in the same manner that in the same way that we view paintings, for example, and examine them, and every time we look at that just one painting specifically, but we tend to have different things going on in our mind every time we look at it. Always different.
Thank you.
Possible that way.
Thank you for the question, Janina. Bob, I assume you heard most of what she said, and I wonder if you could be the one to respond in any way you like.
Well, just one distinction that I want to bring up. I mean, that I agree that Stein was a total proponent of the new of excitement and discovery, both in writing and reading, and I think she wanted to participate in the moment of discovery every time she wrote, and she hoped that readers would have the same participation. I don't think she ever was concerned about her future and that the work would be in a sort of like Shakespeare, imperishable, or the way Joyce thought about Ulysses, that he wanted to keep readers busy for the next couple of centuries with all the different facts. That seems very distinct from what Stein was doing. It's all about the excitement of an opening present that she is presenting to. She's enacting for herself and presenting to readers.
Janina, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Before we hang up, can I ask you a couple questions? So you speak Tagalog and Spanish?
A little bit Spanish, yeah.
Okay. And so what has it been? Why did you take ModPo, and what's it been like reading all this American English?
Oh, actually, I took some creative writing classes.
Ah, great.
While attending college, and very, very much of a fan of the beat poets during my younger years, and I wanted to discover more of modern poetry. And actually, it's a very good experience for me that I am able to do close reading of a lot of modern poetry. Yeah.
Great. Can you briefly say who of the poets we've met in the first 2 chapters, who is your favorite poet whom you did not know or had not read before?
Wallace Stevens.
13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. You like that poem?
Yeah.
Great.
I like Gray Room also, because I like it when writers are able to create that kind of intensity using imagery. Yeah.
Great. Well, Janina, time for you to go to bed, and I'm assuming it's the end of your day. So thanks so much for calling and for being part of ModPo.
Thank you also. I've been enjoying the classes, so yeah.
All right. Take care.
Right.
Julia Block, what do we have?
So Jennifer Sneed.
Jennifer Sneed, our Jennifer Sneed, who's in Texas Tech.
Just wondered, did Stein mean to be difficult? Did she invite frustration? Does she invite our struggling with these texts? I think it's an important question, given that all we've been talking about in terms of her being accessible, democratic, wanting to be about new and the discovery.
All right, I'm going to ask Ron and Rachel very briefly to answer that question. Ron, Jennifer Sneed's question is, did she intend to be difficult?
Right. Well, certainly Albert Barnes and Leo Stein thought Gertrude intended to be difficult, but that was not on the level of her literary texts. That was an interpersonal in those terms. I think she was clearly intending to operate in a very different relationship to readers and to the literary, quote unquote, than the literary figures who were normative during her period. There is just nothing remotely like Edward Arlington Robinson or A.E. Housman about Gertrude Stein, not to mention Tennyson or some of those characters. So she clearly is doing different things in that regard, and it's interesting to think about in those terms. And just to slightly include what was being said before, it's interesting to think that she's writing in English. I don't know whether or not any members of her family spoke Yiddish or Hebrew. That was less common during her childhood, I think, than it is in Jewish families today in those terms. But she was also living in a city in which English was not the spoken language for a half a century. So her relationship to English and English's relationship to all these other languages changes certainly in her life.
Good point. Rachel, briefly on this?
Yeah, I want to respond to Ron. I think that there are 2 things, and also to the question that was asked. Stein works with just about any language manipulation that can be postulated in this work. That is, you can say there are sound associations. There's definitely translingual puns, not necessarily in the snippets that we've read, but they exist. There's writing from prior writing, but mostly not literary writing, more like nursery rhymes and bromide poetry, like peas porridge hot, that kind of thing. There's tons of slid phonemes. There's homophonic evocations or seemingly homophonic translations across languages. French, possibly German. She lived in Germany when she was a wee child for some reason. I'm not sure what it is. But the interesting thing about it is that none of these tactics is patterned. That is, you don't learn to expect that every 5th word will be a homophonic translation and the 6th word will be an allusion to a nursery rhyme and so on. That makes it a little bit intractable. To answer or not to answer, but to respect the question that was asked about Jennifer's question. That's a little bit Is she intending? Does she want to be difficult? Is she playing a game with us? That is the way that the form that question often comes up. She's playing a game with herself. She's an extremely ludic poet in Tender Buttons. She is enjoying the mechanisms of her mind that allow this writing, which is somewhat hypnagogic. It happens at night, and it's then typed up by Alice. It's somewhat hypnagogic, but it's not stream of consciousness, which is another matter altogether.
Right.
She is pleasuring herself, and I mean every implication of that, every linguistic and other implications that you can give to it. She is not playing a game with us. She's not making things hard for us. She's enjoying herself, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. We've got to go to. We're going to wrap up pretty soon. We're going to go to a phone call for a question, final question from there, and then we're going to do some final words here. So, Lily, who do we have on the phone?
Well, first I want to apologize. There was a dropped call of someone calling from Sri Lanka, and we got disconnected, so I really apologize to that person who's calling. But right now we have Carol on the phone from the Bay Area.
Carol?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, Carol. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Oh, absolutely. This is Al, and so you've been in ModPo all along, all 4 weeks?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Carol, are you on a cell phone?
Yes.
Okay, go to a spot where you get good connection. I was just asking, have you been with ModPo the whole time?
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
I've been enjoying it thoroughly. Can you hear me better right now?
Absolutely. You got to the right space there in San Francisco. Would you make a comment about Stein, and we'll have our guest poets respond?
Absolutely. And can I have some thank you that I would really want to pass on very quickly.
Go ahead.
Could I do that? So first off, I would love to thank Dr. Duplessis. I took a class with her and Victor, my boyfriend at the time as well. We took a class at Temple University over a decade ago, and we still remember it. So
that's great. Here's Rachel, your former teacher.
Yes. Right, shoot me an email. Tell me what it was. But now we need the question, so we can have what is the answer?
Yeah.
Yes. So I actually had a question about Let Us Describe. I really fell in love with that poem, and I was wondering who is us in Let Us Describe. Is it the universe, or us, like all of us, meaning that none of us can really describe the pain, whenever an accident occurs, or
All right. So the question is about the prose poem in the Valentine to Sherwood Anderson called "Let Us Describe," and the question from Carol from the Bay Area is what is us? So who's got the portable mic? Okay, Jason, could you put that mic in front of Dave Poplar, who doesn't know it's coming? Quickly.
I don't want to take any time away from the panel.
That's all right. I want you to say who us is, quickly.
Well, I just think she's talking collectively about us and language.
All right, give the mic to Jeremy. Jeremy, who's us? And Let Us Describe.
Everybody, all the readers, the poem.
Those who are reading the poem. All right, give it to Ray for one more. Ray, who is us?
You know my story on Let Us Describe, or maybe you don't remember it from ModPo.
I do, but let's hear it.
Us are the attendees of a lynching party.
So that is Ray's alternative reading to Let Us Describe. Okay. Karen, you want to try one more, and then we'll open it up?
I'm going to talk about us.
Yeah, Let Us Describe, right.
It's everybody in the world, because she always talked to everybody. She wrote her autobiography of everybody, so it's everybody.
Okay. All right, Julia, settle this. And good luck in 30 seconds responding to Ray's reading as well. That's you can either bracket that off for another conversation. Although last year we did talk about it a little bit.
I'm going to go back to Rachel's point about how you don't see I in these poems, and there's a way in which these poems implicate the reader, as many people have said, but there's also something about the spectator. So I want to talk with Ray more about his reading of this poem too. The people who are watching the poem come together, and there's something about us all composing the poem together, even though it's here on the page, it's printed out, it's made out of ink,
right.
But it takes shape only when we read it.
I'm going to take a shot, and then I'm going to invite the three poets, two to my right and Ron, to say anything they like as final words about any of this, really words that they want to share with you before we stop talking about Stein for now. So just some thoughts that they have. To me, let us describe. Let us is what we normally, it's a version of what we normally say when we say let's. So it's a kind of, it's a somewhat weak us, to me. That is to say, it's an open and opaque us, but it's the kind of us you hear in let's when let's is a command. She's basically issuing an invitation. So you really don't have much of a choice but to be in that us, because she is going to command us to describe things in a different way, in a way that's going to allow the end of that prose poem to be truly tragic. And the accidental quality of the end of that prose poem gets us implicated in the fragmentation that happens there at the end of that tragedy. So, Carol, are you still on the line?
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much. Hope you'll come back to Philly and hang out with Rachel at the Writer's House.
Absolutely, and you know, I also took a class with Bob Perlman at some point, and just wanted to thank him as well, because he has been an amazing influence on me, and you know, just a great inspiration.
That's great. Huh. That's so great. Nice. Well, thank you, Carol, for the call, and thanks for being part of ModPo. I'm going to ask Rachel, Bob, and Ron in that order to briefly say one more thing as a final word, and then we'll wrap up with a couple of announcements. So, are you okay going first?
Yep,
Rachel?
I'm all right.
All right.
I'm going to pull something from Steve McCaffrey, and therefore from Bataille, a theoretician. McCaffrey talks about, as Bataille did, excessive energy that can't be used, what he calls the general economy. And it's as if in this work Stein has tapped into this general human energy: discharge, flow, waste, orgasm, sacrifice, which gets a little bit to raise, and dreams. It's not a specific economy of utility, accumulation, or statement. And this is a very challenging statement, which I'm just sort of laying out. It seems to me, however, that although this is true, Stein is anti-logocentric, which this implies. That is, she doesn't want singular meaning, but she's not really anti-patriarchal. I'll just leave you with that.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much. Bob Perlman, a final word on this?
Just really maybe very interesting what Rachel said. I'm thinking about it while I'm also trying to pretend that I'm giving you my final statement here.
So Perlmanian.
But I want to say about I guess to bring it back to the class. Tender Buttons, I think, is sui generis, one of a kind work in general, but in Stein's work, it's really not like the rest of her work in many ways, and it's this breakthrough moment where she breaks away from the earlier giant scientific novel that she was writing, and then pretty soon after it she becomes Gertrude Stein, and I think that there is a kind of memory trace that haunts her, or certainly it burdens her to some extent for the rest of her career. Not that she didn't write decades and decades of great work, but Tender Buttons strikes me as, maybe I'm agreeing, Rachel, with a no I here, getting back to your statement, there's a freedom of writing whatever that is, it's remarkably open and rich, and her later discussions of Tender Buttons actually tend to tamp it down, and she says, oh, it's Cubist portraiture, and I'm not describing what what the titles are. That strikes me as a kind of a bunch of red herrings that don't really go very far. So I guess just hats off to that breakthrough moment, which is still so exciting to read.
Thank you, Bob, very much. Ron Silliman, you get the last word before my final announcements.
Okay. The mention of Steve McCaffrey, who wrote the introduction to the wonderful Canadian version of Tender.
Oh, hold it up again, Ron, so we can see it. There it is.
Yeah, there it is. It's available in the Book Thug catalog, bookthug.ca. mentions that this book was published by a small press in May of 1914, Claire Marie Press, and remained out of print until the mid-1960s, when a facsimile edition was done by Haskell House, and then was returned to print by yet another small press by Dick Higgins Something Else Press. So the fugitive nature of this work is, in fact, actually, I think, an important part of its heritage. And I certainly agree with many of the things both Bob and Rachel said, although I would note that the idea that this work is unlike the rest of Stein's work is sort of the thing I think one tends to say about any given project of Stein's when you start to look at it. It's true of the operas, it's true of Making of the Americans, it's true of Stanzas and Meditation. You know, there's a lot of non-repeats amidst all this repetition. Certainly true of the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. And it's been a pleasure being here from Book Thug Plaza in Western Toronto.
Okay, Ron, thank you. I'm going to thank our poets in a minute, but I just want to throw out a couple of shout-outs and announcements before we sign off. First of all, to Emma Reed, there's a thread in ModPo where people are posting selfies. The idea is to take a picture of yourself doing ModPo, reading a poem or where you are. I recommend you go to that thread and at least look at the pictures of us doing our thing, but or add one. And Emma Reed just this morning posted a selfie of herself. Rachel can see it. She's near the water. I am doing ModPo as I kayak and camp around Whitsunday Islands. There's a lot of islands in ModPo today. In northern Queensland, Australia. Thanks to my phone, the wonder of it all. Emma Reed doing ModPo in the middle of, for what is for me, you know, nowhere. I'm so glad that you're doing that. Second shout out is to Joyce Pope, who is the mom of our beloved community TA, Therese, or Teresa, do we say Teresa? I think it's Therese Pope, and she writes a note that starts, Dear Al and ModPo family, and she signs it, Joyce Pope, ModPo Pope person, haha. And she sends, she's a photographer, and she sends a bunch of wonderful pictures, and she made us some cards out of the photographs, which I will spread around to people here today, Joyce. And she talks about her love of poetry and how her move through the Imagists at the end of chapter 2 was fun for her because of its obvious affiliation with imagery and photography. And she notes that I have had 4 aunts who at the age of 80 began a phase of dementia that is not very pleasant. I figured that if I keep exercising my brain, I will be able to postpone it for another 2 decades. And Joyce Pope, mom of Therese, we hope that that's in fact true, and we hope that reading Stein actually keeps your brain going, and I'm sure it does. There must be some study that needs to be done by doctors about how that's the case. And one more shout out before I say goodbye to people and thank people, and this is to Celia Parrott, who is in ModPo for the second year. She lives in what she calls the Sand Hills of Nebraska, near 10 miles away from the nearest town, which is Lakeside, Nebraska. She lives on 32 acres, and she was hit by a tornado-like thing there in the summer, just before ModPo started. Everything was wiped out, including some trees, Chinese elms and cottonwoods and bur oaks, which she cares a lot about. It's all been uprooted, and it's total chaos. And one of the things that got damaged was the satellite dish that was her connection to us in ModPo. She wrote me a paper note because she couldn't get the internet. She misses us. And I wrote her an email just figuring, let's hope she's back up last night. And she's back up, and she's joining ModPo late. And Celia Parrott, take care of those trees and your 32 acres. I've never been to the Sandhills of Nebraska, but I'm going to try to drive through there someday and surprise you and see all those new trees that you're planting. And we're just glad that you're part of ModPo, and welcome back to the connection. So I want to thank Jeremy Dixon, for instance, for coming from Wales via New York. Jeremy, it's great to meet you. It really is. I hope we have a couple minutes afterwards to say hello. Ray and Karen coming from Washington, among others. Ken, directly from central Mexico today, or you're visiting, or you're living here, or... Wait, give him the mic, please. Yeah.
Today directly from Washington Square, but...
From Washington Square, okay.
In general.
All right, great. and others, Richard and others who've joined us, and Eric, who didn't get to talk today, but I'm so glad that you're here, and your contributions to the discussion forums, Eric, are fantastic. We really appreciate this. We're doing this together, clearly. Maria from Crete, Janina from the Philippines, Moshe, who didn't get through, from Israel, hello, Carol from San Francisco, and others, thank you for calling. We really appreciate it. Julia Block, you are the best, and I'm so glad that we gave away your book to someone we didn't get to talk to, but I hope, do you have a name so she can inscribe the book?
Andy.
Andy, we're going to inscribe this book. Julie, you're the best. Thank you for all that you do for the ModPo community. Zach, you're great. Thank you so much for handling this. There's Zach. You can see him. Chris Martin, it takes 2 hours to set up one of these webcasts. I had no idea it's that complicated. You are amazing. Chris Martin, let's hear it for him. You're amazing. Steve McLaughlin, we always have to get a look at Steve, and if you do that, you're also going to see Emily Harnett. Hi, Emily. And there's Steve. Thank you. You're amazing, Steve. You make this seem so easy, and we know it's not. Jason and Dave and Katie and others, Andrea, community TAs, and Emily I mentioned already. And so we're just so glad that you're here. And most of all, Rachel, Bob, and Ron, this is a huge treat. I just want to say what we sort of bring in the big guns, even though you think of yourselves as just any other reader of, and would argue that. But the fact is that when we teach Stein through a MOOC, there's a certain amount of credence we have to build up. Like, are we really doing this? Is this for real? Is this just a total joke? And you're talking so articulately about these issues, partly to reinforce what we've already said, and partly to introduce new ideas. It just lends credence to the whole project. So, Rachel Blau-Duplessis, let's hear it for Rachel. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. Really appreciate it. Bob Perlman, a longtime colleague and friend. And Ron Silliman in Toronto, where there's a reading tonight at 8 p.m. Toronto time. Ron, thank you. We love you so much. Ron Silliman.
Thank you.
Thank you all from the Writers' House, and we'll see you at the next webcast, and we will see you in the forums.